at the Battle Creek at the sand. Post used to come around at the sand, right? And then he just left, and all of a sudden had this great idea for cornflakes. What? I'm sorry. No.
Hi, my name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen?
Hello, and welcome to another episode of How Did That Happen? This week we're discussing cereal. Come along for the ride this week as I ask, cereal, how did that happen? All right. Welcome back for another episode of HDTH. We are running on, this is episode 43 now, I believe. I've been trying to get a couple more of these, I think banked as they call it, pre-recorded before, at least a week or two before, to give myself a little more time to try to put some other things out. I haven't quite gotten there yet, but this one was one that I already had. I think I recorded like a week or two ago. And like I said, I'm trying to stay in that vein a little bit, so we'll see. It's another way to keep growing. What am I, let's see, the normal housekeeping here. What am I watching right now? I started watching some of that Ken Burns Holocaust documentary that they've been putting out on PBS. I only watched like one episode. It was pretty good. I love Ken Burns' stuff. I've watched documentaries on his documentaries, like the whole style and the way that he shoots his documentaries, and the fact that like he's kind of the one who pioneered the whole idea of like putting a picture on like a little one of those whiteboards and like zooming in on it really slowly as he tells you what's going on. Like that is like the majority of like documentaries now, but a lot of people don't have the same information or production value that he does. But that is a Ken Burns type thing. I'll tell you what, I've also been watching. I've been watching it on YouTube, but it's a History Channel show. I forget exactly what it's called, but it's when this guy goes underneath. The whole thing is the guy goes underneath like the normal parts of the city and goes in like tunnels and in subways and stuff like that, and like the deeper parts that you don't really think about. And I watched one on New York City, and I didn't realize that they are going in some cases under the East River with these tunnels. Like I'm from Hampton Roads. We have tunnels that go underwater to go under bridges, but I didn't know that you can actually put a tunnel under a river. So that was some crazy stuff that I learned this past weekend. And I watched like 10 of those episodes, and he goes all over the place. I mean, they go up and they go down. They climb these mountains in Ethiopia and find this church up there, and it's like the mountain is like ergonomically shaped from all the feet and hands that have climbed it over the past like I guess couple thousand years. And it's wild. It is. But yeah, so that's what I'm watching right now. Still haven't gotten back into my reading yet. I'm sure it's coming as the fall comes. Let's see. What podcasts am I listening to / watching? I'm always listening to the Honeydew. Bertcast. Two Bears, One Cave. Let's see. I listen to Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast. Anything that Tim Dillon's on, I've been really, really getting into him recently. I've always known who he was, but like really like actually enjoying the stuff that he puts out. I listen to his podcast every week. Can't really think of any too many more off the top of the head. If you guys want to drop some recommendations, I'm certainly down to listen to them. I do that all the time at work. What kind of podcast are you guys listening to? This is what I'm listening to. Although, by the way, I have a podcast if you want to listen to. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say. Don't want to ramble too much, and so without further ado, here's the episode. Wikipedia defines cereal as any grass cultivated for edible components of its grain. It's definitely something I've thought of before, but I wouldn't say that's what comes to mind for me when I think of cereal. So the Roman goddess Ceres, who was the protector of grain, great job, is where we get the term cereal. That's your trivia for today, or at least for right now. I didn't know that. I had no idea that the term that we use for Cheerios and Lucky Charms comes from a Roman god. Roman goddess. The early Neolithic or New Stone Age shows evidence that they would process grains all the way back then as well. So people have been getting their cereal on for a while. And so wheat originated in the cradle of civilization in the Tigris and Euphrates River Valley near present-day Iraq. Archaeological findings show that wheat first occurred in parts of Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, the Levant, Israel, Egypt and Ethiopia. I want to go back to that word, the Levant. Levant. You know, I always mispronounce stuff on this podcast, but I learned that word. I never knew that word existed, and I looked up for a while trying to figure out exactly what it is. But it basically just alludes to the idea of a place where it all began. If I'm getting it wrong, please at me. And for once, I would say let me know, because I was trying hard. They mentioned it in a couple articles that I read, and I kind of understand it. But it's basically like it. They talk about it as if it's like the beginning in a weird way. Like I can't even explain it. Like I obviously didn't understand it. So if you want to look it up and school me, I'll go to school. So evidence of the existence of wild barley goes back as far as 23,000 BC. The cultivation of wheat began to spread beyond the Fertile Crescent after about 8,000 BC. And I believe the Fertile Crescent is the same thing as the cradle of civilization, which is basically right around present-day Iraq. Wheat reached Greece, Cyprus, and India by 6500 BC, and Egypt shortly thereafter. The early Egyptians were developers of bread, and with the use of oven technology, developed baking into one of the first large-scale food production industries, which is pretty interesting because, well, I wouldn't say it's pretty interesting. I just find it interesting that because people love bread. People love bread. So by 3000 BC, wheat had reached England and Scandinavia, and one millennium later, it reached China. These processed grains would be used to make things like oatmeal, porridge, gruel, that's a favorite, and other warmed grain-based cereals, which I've never really been a fan of. Never been a fan of like warm grain-based cereals, and I guess I think grits fall into that category as well. Cream of wheat, all that stuff. Like, I mean, it's cool. Like, I'm not a big oatmeal guy either. So, like, all of this stuff does not sound appetizing to me in the least. But this would continue for thousands of years until civilization modernized, thankfully, and the idea of breakfast in the household changed. It changed over time, and so in the Middle Ages, breakfast could be something as simple as a chunk of bread and a bit of wine. As time went on, though, things were added to the menu. And I'll read you off a pretty quick medieval menu, but I'll mention from an article that I read a little bit earlier that they were talking about just the idea of breakfast in the Middle Age times, because this was, technology hadn't progressed as far, I guess, for one reason, but it's like breakfast at that time was kind of it took time to make. So they said, breakfast wouldn't even really be ready until like 11 o'clock, And so by that time, half your day is gone, half the work is done, or whatever. If when you're doing whatever your medieval tasks are, whatever storming, whatever castle you're doing, But so they wouldn't have the breakfast ready when they left at the normal breakfast time. So I don't know. It's just interesting to think, like, when you say breakfast, this is really more like a brunch, really more like an early lunch, But breakfast for all intents and purposes here. So we have the normal. What I'm going to do is just read off to you. Not quite a menu, but a list of things that would be eaten. So don't look that this is what's going to show up on your table. But this is all the options you would have had at your disposal about 600 years ago, maybe 700 years ago, maybe like 900 years ago. So we got ale, we got anchovies, we got beef, beer, bread, as we mentioned, cheese, herring, and I will say all these fish come either smoked or preserved. So I'm not just going to say it once. You got the herring, you got the salmon, you got your saltfish, cod, whiting, and sop in wine, which, I mean, don't tempt me. Don't tempt me with that sop in wine. You don't want to get me there. Love that sop. And then trout, once again, smoked or preserved. That's a hearty medieval breakfast right around the year 1000. And there's one of them that hung around, evidently. In Britain, it's not out of the norm for somebody to eat kippered herring. And it was breakfasts like these that were popular when inventors went looking for more healthy breakfast alternatives. They were like, I'm tired of eating smoked fish for breakfast, Mom. We have to do something else. So this brings us to modern cereal, to the idea of modern cereal. And so food reformers in the 19th century, which is just the 1800s, called for cutting back on excessive meat consumption at breakfast, and they explored numerous vegetarian alternatives. So basically, they were feeling pretty much the way I was saying a little bit earlier, was like, do we have to eat fish every day for breakfast? Maybe we can find something else. Maybe we can make some hot, warm cereals or something. Hope not. So then we get to our man Ferdinand Schumacher, who's a German immigrant who began inventing cereals in 1854 with a hand oat grinder in the back room of a small store in Akron, Ohio. And old Ferdinand was born in Celle, Celle, Hanover, Germany, on March 30th, 1822, and he was the son of a merchant. Aren't they always? He completed high school locally, because where else would you in 1822, and apprenticed in the grocery business. He pursued this and clerked in a manufacturing business until the age 28. And at this point, he and his brother Otto left Germany for greener pastures. He farmed for 2 years and established a grocery trade in Akron, because that's what he's good at. And he remembered back to his old Germany days when he used to grind oats and sell them as breakfast food. Now, what I didn't do is the research, and there were multiple articles that I read that mentioned that people from Germany did this, that this was a common occurrence, I guess, for like local, German villages or whatever during that time. Multiple people who came to America then chose to do the cereal thing in America. So I would love to at some point go back and find out who was making all this cereal in Germany. But he decided to, like we said, he decided to do the same thing that he had done in Germany, in Akron, Ohio. Old Ferdinand started selling his oatmeal, and from there it branched out to the rest of the United States. Let's see, his German mills. It was called the German Mills American Oatmeal Company, and it was the nation's first commercial oatmeal manufacturer. So in 1877, Schumacher, I think it's Schumacher, just from the way it's spelled. Not that there can't be shoemakers out there, but I'm just saying. They adopted the Quaker symbol, which was the first trademarked, which in 1877, Schumacher adopted the Quaker symbol, the first registered trademark for a breakfast cereal. A little trivia for you there. In 1863, I'm going to take it back for a second. James Caleb Jackson, a religiously conservative vegetarian who ran a medical sanitarium in Western New York, created a breakfast cereal from graham flour dough that was dried and broken into shapes so hard they needed to be soaked in milk overnight. He called it granule. I don't know how much I believe about that story, because it just seems too too happenstance. Like, oh, you did all this in one night. You did the dried, thing or whatever, and then you needed milk too. Because what we'll find out is that actually all of this actually happened for the Kellogg brothers over time. So bring in our man, our good friend John Kellogg, and he is a staunch vegetarian who only wore white. He was especially interested in bowel movements, which is a good hobby to have, and he advocated eating everything from seaweed to yogurt, nuts, grains, anything, which was in itself a radical turn from America's meat-centric diet. Like I said, these guys were always eating fish for breakfast, and he believed that eating meat was dangerous to the health of humans, which some people still do. He also had other ideas about where you could put your yogurt. They were said to be doing yogurt enemas at the sanatorium in Battle Creek, Michigan. So if you're ever up in Battle Creek and you're hungry for a little yogurt, you know where to go. This area, Battle Creek, Michigan, has been hailed as the birthplace of the American breakfast. And before we get any deeper, I'm sure some of you are wondering what a sanatorium is. A sanatorium is defined as an establishment or facility offering usually long-term medical care and or treatment. And so Kellogg took over the management of Battle Creek in 1876 with his brother Will, also known as W.K. Kellogg. And he's the guy, at least in my book, who was credited with putting milk in cereal. That other guy from New York who was all just like, it all happened in one night, I don't believe you, bro. I don't believe you. Stuff takes time. WK, he eventually, he found out the right time to put milk in that cereal, but you'll find out his older brother just used to dog him, man. Like, their relationship, and we'll get into it a little bit, but trust me, there are more extensive, and there's more extensive information about how messed up their relationship was besides this podcast. Go check it out. But yeah, so like I said, with WK, we owe this man a trophy on or his own day on the calendar, because he always played the second fiddle to his brother. But this was partly because when he was growing up, he needed glasses, but he didn't know that he needed glasses. So everyone around him just thought he was dumb, which is a very 19th century way of approaching things. like, oh, he can't see. He must be dumb. Like, well, let's get this kid into LensCrafters or something, and we'll find out what's going on. But that's what some of the articles attribute to, is like what